start with, I think I'll start with a poem from my first book, Sweet Husk, and then I'll read one from my 2019 book, The River Where You Forgot My Name, and then we'll see where we go, and maybe I'll read some newer ones. But this is a poem I used to often read to start when I was kind of doing some book touring and readings when this book came out. I would start with this one because it's all a single sentence, and so it felt kind of like breath work, like sort of an Ave Maria to kind of get going. And also it's a little bit of an emotional poem for me, and it just felt like if I could kind of get through this poem, I could get through anything. So this is called Where the Sentence Ends, the Sentiment Burgeons. Years since the old woman's grandson turned early to ash, and years since she's seen the young woman who was his lover, but seeing her now extends her arms, crying, "You look just the same as that first day coming up the driveway. I saw you forking hay from a feed trough as the chaff drifted in the sun and in the long, wild loops of your hair, waving and laughing as if I knew you already. And him leaning on the pitchfork and smiling, the black seed of his dying already planted between his hips, brittle and black as a walnut, smiling as if he'd live forever, or perhaps as if he knew. But it was all right, because that night he would lie by the young woman below the grandparents' bedroom with the windows wide and know the yard gonged with the deep blue temple bells of hyacinth, that the cows sucked moisture from the dark and the owl in the barn laid her eggs slowly through the night's course, so that the hatchlings would wake and feed on one another, and the girl's hair was a great mystery flowing over him to mix with his young man's beard, red as fallow paint on a Swedish cottage, or red as the tongue of the bowsprit his brother will invoke not long from now, wishing to launch the body out to sea, burning, and red as the ruff of twin foxes who bark and snarl, chasing each other through alfalfa rows until they both roll, showing the golden scythe of their bellies to the moon, and she shows them hers.
Nice, nice. This is, you're listening to Corrie Williamson. This is another episode of Poets in Montana. I'm Mark Gibbons, and Corrie is joining me today. That was a poem from her first book, Sweet Husk. And I read that poem. It's a wonderful collection of all those images, and like you say, almost all in one breath. Let me just read this brief little bio on you to give them sort of an idea of where you came from or who you are, and then we'll go with some more poems and chit chat, all that good stuff. Corrie Williamson was born in a small farm in southwestern Virginia. She is the author of 2 books of poetry. Most recently, The River Where You Forgot My Name, which was named a 2019 Montana Book Award honor book by the Montana Library Association. Her first book, Sweet Husk, won the 2014 Perusia Press Prize and was a finalist for the 2015 Library of Virginia Poetry Award. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia with a BA in Poetry and Anthropology and her MFA in Poetry from the University of Arkansas, where she was a recipient of the Walton Fellowship and a director of the Writers in the Schools program. She has taught writing at the University of Arkansas, Helena College, and Carroll College, and worked as an educator in Yellowstone National Park. She was the recipient of the 2020 Penn Northwest Marjorie Davis Boyden Wilderness Writing Residency. Whew, that's a lot to get out, isn't it? Spending 7.5 months writing and living off-grid in a remote section of the Rogue River in Southwest Oregon. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in journals such as the Southern Review, Ecotone, the Kenyon Review, the Missouri Review, Agni, Poetry Daily, Verse Daily, and many others. Now she lives in Lewistown, Montana.
Center of the state. Thank you so much. It's fun to be here. I'm happy to get to talk to you, Mark.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm excited to hear all about how you found Montana, and you grew up in southwestern Virginia. It says, what was that experience like? Or
It was idyllic, actually. My parents had and still have, they're actually still living in the house they moved into a month before I was born, but a little 12-acre kind of hobby farm in southwestern Virginia and kind of the foothills of Appalachian Mountains. And they had cows and then goats for many years. So I just grew up running around in a field with goats and eating a lot of dirt and being chased by chickens. And then did my undergrad degree at University of Virginia, got to work with some really amazing poets there. And then wandered on to Arkansas for my MFA, and then followed a former boyfriend out to Montana, and broke up with him, but not with Montana. And that was 9 years ago, and I'm still here, and I don't intend to go anywhere. I really love Montana and its people and its wildness, and it's clawed its way into my heart. It's got its fangs in me.
kind of grows on you, I think. I mean, I think it's I don't know. My wife, as we get older and you don't like the cold as much as you used to. She was, I think she was born in California, so she would kind of maybe head back to the warmer weather. But it's like, I don't know. I keep sort of silently resisting the whole even thinking about it idea, simply because I can't imagine. I just know I can't imagine moving to. I mean, I like visiting cities and other places, but there's just something about the elbow-ish room, or whatever you want to call it, the ruralness, I guess, of even living in Missoula. It's still, I can walk up Mount Sentinel
Yeah.
in a heartbeat, and I feel like I'm in the middle of Montana. So
No, it's very special, and more people are discovering that it's special, I think, and that's certainly
well, that's
challenge.
bound to happen, right?
Yeah. Yep. I couldn't keep it a secret forever.
When did you I mean, I don't when did you first sort of discover that you were a poet, or poetry came into your sort of reference?
As a very little kid, I mean, I went home recently and my mom was like, clear out your closet, you're 35 years old. So I like went in and found this box of like things that she had saved since elementary school, and there were poems that I wrote in there when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And I read and fell in love with poets and poems through middle school and high school, and had a lot of encouragement. I think that matters so much. It's just
Yeah.
people telling you, even as a very young person, that you have a gift or a voice, or just a right to do those things, and to express yourself that way. So then was encouraged quite a bit more in high school, and went to college and was like, I'm not going to study poetry. Like, I'm going to like do something lucrative. And then I studied poetry and archaeology undergrad, because my parents are the best, and they were like, do what you love. Um,
Yeah.
and then did that
Great.
at UK, and went on to get the master's degree, and I don't regret it for a second.
No, there's more life than money, obviously.
There sure is.
Yeah, and because we know there's no money well, maybe there's some in archaeology, but we know there's none in poetry.
Yeah.
That mention of falling and knowing that kind of, or falling in love with poetry very young, and then knowing throughout, elementary school and when you were in school, that you wanted to be a writer, you had a voice, and that people were encouraging you along the way. That's one of the beauties of poets in the schools, writers in the schools. I've been doing that here now for, in this state for about 25 years. And of course, that didn't happen. And my own personal experience of coming into an awareness of poetry as a means of self-expression was in high school. And that was through the Writers in the Schools program when it first came into schools in Montana. So it does really matter, this arts in the schools stuff, and writers in the schools. And you worked as in the Writers in the Schools program in Arkansas. How was that experience?
It was wonderful. I mean, so it was a great program with a lot of resources at the University of Arkansas. And so it I participated all 4 years of my MFA program as a writer. So the graduate students actually got a stipend and got paid to go out and spend a couple of days. We would do 2 days at each school throughout the year. And then 1 year I was the director of the program because I just really loved it and thought it was powerful. And something we did too was we made a little anthology. We would put together a book of some of the poems that were written, and it was so cool to go into these schools, schools in like West Memphis and little towns all over Arkansas, and say, like you can be in this book, and like your classmate is in this book, and just be able to share that with kids is that is really new, I think, and startling to them, and it can light some really cool fires.
It's powerful. It's really powerful. Not only on an individual level, which it needs to be, but communally. Like, because you would do probably group readings with kids and stuff, and they would read, and you hear each other read, and these like personal experiences, and it's like,
yeah. And there's always that kid who like never talks and is never excited about anything, and their teacher is like, oh my God, they wrote this out of the world poem and they're ready to share it, and you're just like, yes.
yeah, you feel like you're contributing something worthwhile, besides just sitting around and scribbling yourself on the
Yes. Which I hope is also contributing something worthwhile.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, when you can give that gift to kids.
Well, read us another poem,
Okay.
something you want to share.
I'm torn. I was like, oh, maybe I'll read my Yellowstone poem, or maybe I'll read, I think what I'll do next is read this poem, which is called another kind of burly title, but At the Farmers Union's Women's Conference in Paradise, Montana. And for a little context for this poem, for several years when I was living in Helena, I was the outreach director for a really great, quirky little nonprofit called Arrow, which is really kind of focused on sustainable agriculture and food access and local food systems. And several years in a row I was there, I would attend this conference. So there's the Montana Farmers Union, which is another sort of nonprofit and just kind of support system for farmers in Montana. And then they have their own conference, and they have a women's conference. And I would go, and it's always at a hot spring, and it's this like amazing kind of combination of badass women who are like, let me teach you how to like felt a wool ornament, or like, let me teach you how to skin a sheep, or, let's talk about like creating like allies via potlucks. And it was just, it blew my mind every year. And so this one was at the Quinn's Hot Springs in Paradise. And I was just thinking about women and women together, and the power of women as kind of protectors and keepers. And I just am feeling like the moment is right for this poem. So this is at the Farmers Union's Women's Conference in Paradise, Montana. The herbalist has hair like a red horse tail, and I have had too little coffee to stomach some of the Gaia woo-woo, but I am trying to listen when she speaks about magpies nesting in the brambling hawthorn. She is saying St. John's wort is community, is the sun, is my mother. And she actually uses the words maiden and crone to describe her audience, and tells us that yarrow root will stop bleeding, but start menstrual flows. And all I can think is that yarrow must be an old word indeed, and weaves together yesterday and tomorrow, used by Achilles on the battlefields of Troy to sop his brother's rosy wounds. While on she goes, this skinny oracle, her lilt a quiet one, but I peg her for a native when she says measure, the long open-mouthed melodic may of the first syllable, catching me again as it did the first time I heard the lentil farmer use it to describe the wealth of dirt. I knew something in the tone had traveled from a white and green country of ice to live here like a castaway whose black ship sails a sea of grass, telling me how to measure the tincture, the root, the los, while outside snow is falling on the earthly garden and my brain stumbles with white flowers and wanting to say, oh sisters, oh city keepers, yellow sparrows.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, we are obviously embarking on a new era of history, right? And I guess your work is starting all over again, or our work is starting all over again. I mean, obviously, what polls were somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 70% of the country disagreed with the recent Supreme Court decision to make women their pet project.
Vessels. Yes, yes, I
Uh,
know. It's been a really hard week.
yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of hard days ahead. But I mean, it's probably fertile ground for poets.
It is. And yeah, actually, if you don't mind, maybe I'll read another one kind of along those lines. And this actually just came out in the Kenyan Review. So it's from my new manuscript, my manuscript in progress that I worked quite a bit on when I was living in the Rogue Wilderness in Oregon for the residency that you mentioned, Mark. And I write a ton about my sister, who is this I like to sort of say lovingly that she's a witch. She kind of is. She lives on a mountaintop in Virginia. She grows herbs. She makes tinctures. She is a woodworker and a farmer, and just this like really fierce, incredible woman. And I write about her a lot because she, I think, helps me think about the world in different ways. And I also just write about kind of danger and intention. And so I was in the wilderness, and she sent me this letter where she kind of described this interaction with my father that's at the heart of this poem. So this is called You're Hoarding Guns, I'm Growing Herbs. You're hoarding guns, I'm growing herbs, my sister tells my father after he bends to pluck from her patch of pennyroyal, age-old abortifacient from Mint's family, square-stemmed, toxic, crested like a tropical bird with morning purple tuft. And he straightens, says, "You giving away abortions now?" Later, she writes me, I think he understood. And yet I cannot say what unholy act, what cruel law or deed does not endeavor to protect something. Not so very long ago, my sister could have hanged as a witch for her wilderness gardens of nettle and hyssop, of yarrow and calendula, her care for forbidden bodies and snaring of bee swarms from pine branches. Come spring, she'll find in the wet, death-refreshed loam, spent shotgun shells planted among saved seed of belladonna, mugwort, blue cohosh, Queen Anne's lace, named, so the lore goes, for the old queen's contest to see who could knit a stitched bloom most like the flower's fractal, tooth-white face, though she pricked her finger as she purled, loosed a single dark drop onto her own lace's clean new eye.
Nice. Yeah, your work, the attention to detail, the images, and the rhythms, the music in your poetry is wonderful, and it's kind of, I mean, when you start thinking about where it may go next, but with poems like that, and what the future holds in terms of, I mean, all poetry is political as far as I'm concerned. I mean, life is political. It just is, because it's a power play of some kind. And that's so poetry, we're going to see more and more of that as we head on. But when you think about the position that we're in right now, this juxtaposition of this gun thing that is so present in America, and this ruling that women don't have the capacity to control their own lives. But we have to have all these guns while children are laying bloody and riddled, and people in pews and churches and buying fucking groceries at the goddamn store. All of this, it's quite the authoritarian story at this point.
It is, and it's full of contradictions in the way that America is just full of contradictions, and we just have so much work to do to talk each other through them and figure out the ways that are least harmful. And that's hard.
Yeah,
It's really
yeah,
hard.
exactly. It is because I mean, I mean, I don't. If it's my initial reaction is always, it's a rage. It's an absolute. You just want to grab the gun off the pile, because it's just But then obviously better than that, and that it's just the only thing that works is love is the only answer to this, because it's fear based. It's all fear based.
And control and yeah,
Just
but yeah,
afraid.
fear is at the heart of that. I
Just
know.
afraid. So, how about reading us another poem?
Okay. Well, since we're on it, I'll read this poem, which is another poem, another newer one that I wrote at the Rogue in the wilderness. And I was just me for the most part, my very old dog out there, 2 hours from any kind of town, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. We were there for 7.5 months. We had visitors. My partner came when he could, but it was just a whole new way of living and being, and I think kind of rewired my brain. And just, it's hard to not sit out there on the deck and watch the wind move through the old growth fir trees and just kind of not think about your own ripples in the world. And so this poem is sort of about how do you do that? How do you live and not cause damage and harm? And I don't really think that you can, but I think that you can minimize that. And so it's built around the idea of the meta meditation or loving kindness meditation, which is where you kind of, you imagine other people in the world and you sort of wish them peace and health and happiness. And so the poem is kind of trying to do that. It's what's going on in my brain while I'm trying to do that, which is chaos. So this is called meditation. Quiet, I say to the mind, and the mind says, frog song, bear emergence, death of all salmon kind, local proliferation of buried nuclear silos, tomorrow's breakfast, blossom riot of bees in pollen tresses, a child reaching into a sleek, unlocked gun safe. May all beings be safe, I go on, and the mind hears only scriffle scutter of mice in the insulation. May all beings be well, I insist, and the mind pries open the eye to see one like a fat suede knuckle, paw tucked, slinking behind the stove, along the corner and out of sight. May all beings know contentment in hard times. The mind reminds me that mice are thigmotrophic and hug a wall like a mother's hip. Little cannonball of knowing. May all beings know peace, I say, but the mind already is planning where to put the poison. There are a lot of mice in my house, to be fair.
Busy mind, exactly.
Busy mind, busy.
Innocence and experience, right? I mean, once you know, you can't unknow. The mind can't let go of shit.
It cannot. No, it likes to churn, that's for sure.
Because it's so intelligent and so aware. I mean, we are. Yeah. Well, let's see. What else can we talk about? So what's going on in your world at present with your career or what you're up to, right? I mean, I don't know what the hell that is.
I'm totally with you. Have you seen? There's that amazing poem. I think it's a poem and not a letter that Wendell Berry wrote to Hayden Carruth, where he's sort of I greet you at the beginning of a great career, but then he's all maybe let us not have careers lest we be caught dead in them. And I've just always loved that. Of course, Wendell would say that. But yeah, I mean, I moved to Lewistown a year ago to work for American Prairie, the organization formerly known as American Prairie Reserve, which is a huge sort of large-scale ecosystem conservation project. What's huge about it is the ecosystem, not the organization. Kind of based in the central Montana grasslands. Really interesting project. I am their community outreach manager, basically. and it's a lot of conversations with rural folks and farmers and ranchers, and it keeps my brain doing mental gymnastics and doing a lot of work, and working towards empathy, which I think is really important, especially for a poet. So that's been a really good thing for me, and I love little Lewistown, and I think it's in the middle of everything, but on the way to nothing. So I think a lot of Montanans have heard of it, but not been to it. So not to give the secret away, but if you haven't been out to Lewistown and the Island Mountain Ranges, like the Judiths and some of that landscape, and the Charles M. Russell Wildlife Refuge, or the Judith Landing, which is the Judith River, is the river that's mentioned in my book, the river where you forgot my name. We can get into that if we want, but anyway, it's really lovely out here, and it's been a good move for me. I'm also getting ready to take a couple weeks off and go to Helena and then to Yellowstone to teach a seminar with a colleague of mine from Carroll College. And it's supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it's for K through 12 educators. And it's aimed at kind of incorporating humanities perspectives on nature into the classroom. So we're going to spend 2 weeks in Helena reading and talking, and Melissa Kwasny is going to join us and take us out to the pictographs over at Canyon Ferry, and talk about her beautiful book of poetry about the pictographs. And we'll go to the Lincoln Sculpture Park, the Sculpture in the Wild, one day, and the Berkeley Pit in Butte one day. And then we'll spend a week in Yellowstone as well. So I'm really excited for that, to kind of get back in the classroom and talk to teachers and talk about literature and texts. And that should be fun too.
Sounds great. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how many people are taking it?
16 teachers from all over the country. So different subject areas, different grade levels, in that K through 12 window, from California and Washington and Virginia and all over the place. So it'll be really fun. It's been interesting to kind of try to pivot a little bit, because our last week is in Yellowstone, and things are changing in Yellowstone with the floods, and they've instituted their alternating license plate system, and it closed down northern portions of the park. So we're having to get a little bit creative about where we go and what we talk about and how we spend time in the park. But I think that will also make for some more interesting conversation about how we live with the big wild world, who is doing her own thing and doesn't care whether we get to take a bunch of teachers in to visit her.
And she may be angry, or angrier than she used to be. In our
Rightfully so. Yeah, I wouldn't blame her. I don't blame her.
Yeah, my son is a wildland firefighter, so I've kind of tuned into that world for quite some time now. He's been doing it for 16 plus years or something like that. So yeah, I mean, just the reality in the drought-driven West these days. And then, the other odd sort of things that happen as the climate continues accelerating change. I mean, so are you, do you address those kinds of topics in some of your work at all? Are you someone that's dealing with that issue in your writing, or not?
A little bit, yeah. No, I mean, I think that kind of collision of natural forces and human forces is something that's really, really interesting to me. In this book, I wrote a lot about that, and kind of the narrative of Lewis and Clark, and what is that narrative really meant for the landscape and wildness and animals and women and Indigenous people, and like how we've sort of accepted this hero narrative about these couple of white dudes who, floated canoes down a river. And, I have been fascinated with that story since I was a little girl, and both Clark and Lewis grew up in Virginia, and so they're very celebrated there. And then I moved to Montana, and they're very celebrated here. And so a lot of this book was me kind of working through, like, what does that really mean for me? And what is the West? And what is this kind of like myth and strangeness and beauty of the West? And then I think I've been writing a little bit more towards like climate change and human caused destruction. And maybe I'll actually, since you brought up wildfires, maybe I'll read another new poem. I'm a poet, so I'm always like into what I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, those books, they're great, I'm so excited to read them. No, that's not true. But I do another poem that I wrote at the Rogue when there was quite a bit of wildfire. So my fall season, my September, was just a blanket of smoke. in this, gorgeous old growth, Douglas fir, madrone, canyon oak, like incredible ecosystem out there. And so I wrote this poem kind of in the midst of a very foggy fire season. And then my partner's mother and their family had come out to visit and stay. And we went on all these hikes, and she kept saying to me, like, is this the forest primeval? Is this the forest primeval? Because it made her think about that. And we couldn't even remember. I was like, oh, is that Shelley? I forget who that is, And so then I left and was like, oh, it's Longfellow, and started like reading a little bit of Longfellow and like remembering that poem. And so this poem is kind of about fire and Longfellow and forests. And the title comes from a letter that he wrote to his wife. Oh, come and let me tell thee how wholly I am thine. Is this the forest primeval? I ask the sugar pines, walking among them, the ship-high firs with waistcoasts of fire scar, the shimmering alder, the laddered shadow of bracken fern. But would the woods know themselves this way? Do these trees shudder now as neighboring acre after acre burns and turns the barred earth between their shadows ochre? The mind grasps so little of itself, St. Elmo's fire, its Marianus, murmurations and forgotten heartwood. Ash light and autumn make my sleep strange. The brain gets down on all fours, scratching at all the doors it's invented for itself. In bed, a blanket of smoke scent. I dream of Longfellow's wife, how, sealing envelopes of her daughter's curls with a red kiss of wax, she lit her dress afire, and wind through the window swirled her body into a pillar of flame, on which Longfellow, clutching her, singed his arms and face, and thereafter grew a beard, carried a staff of sorrow, tall and spined as a hemlock tree, which are all now dead or dying. How I am alive after what my eyes have seen, I know not, he wrote, though alive he was, alive in the red dew of morning, in the houseless wild, singing still of that which goes before us into shade. I would say that that's my climate change poem. Like that's my that's my kind of like, how do we go on and how do we deal with this and how do we move past our own brains and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But we keep writing about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it'll. I mean, we always are a day late and a dollar short, it seems like. And I mean, we really have to. The hard lessons have to be felt, I think, before we really do something about it. So I mean, we are starting to feel it in a big way, but it's going to probably get worse before it gets better, I'm guessing.
Oh no, I think you're right. We're gonna need a lot of poems and a lot of action.
Yeah, that'd be nice if we could move beyond inaction. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what people do. I mean, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of the argument of to do or not to do, to destroy or to work within the system. The whole business of all of that. I mean, it's like, well, it'll play itself out. It's beyond me. I haven't got too many miles left in me probably at this point. So I'll just, try to be supportive until time arrives.
You'll leave the dismantling of the system to the rest of us. Is that what you're saying, Mark?
It's got to happen somehow. Yeah, it's got to happen. Well, so what else? Read us something else from maybe your newer book. Hey, tell me, what year were you on the Rogue River?
2020. It was unbelievable. So I worked as an educator in Yellowstone and as a guide in the, I guess, spring, summer, fall of 2019 and the winter. So like December, January, February of 2020, the pandemic hit. I had been, the way this residency works is that they give you extreme advance notice because they expect you to come out the year before your residency and visit and look at it and be like, I'm up for this. Like I'm up for this level of remoteness and solitude. And so I'd known since 2018, because they do it in 2-year cycles, that I was going to have this residency. So I kind of left the job I'd had in Helena and, gave up some of my adjuncting and went and worked in Yellowstone on kind of a wild hair, knowing that then I would go from there to the residency. So yeah, so like Bradley Boyden, who is the property owner out there, who has set up the residency program along with his brother, Frank Boyden, called me and was like, let's get you in before, this is like March of 2020. And he's like, I'm worried they're going to shut down the like state borders, like come in here, buy enough food for like 4 weeks in case you don't go out like the entire first month, either because the world is on fire or because like you can't get out because the roads are bad because it's still spring and it's wet and rainy. And so like I packed up my dog and I packed up my little truck and I drove from Yellowstone to the Rogue. And that was March 30th of 2020. And I came out at the very last possible point I could when Bradley was calling me again. And he was like, you need to come out now because it's going to like snow and you're going to get stuck in there because you have to go over kind of a high mountain pass to get to the site. And so he came in and we shut it down and turned off it's all off grid, but there's a gravity flow water system coming out of a spring in the hillside, and there's homemade solar water panels. And so we shut it all down and turned it all off and locked up all the gates. And I left on November 15th of 2020. So clean 7.5 months. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life. It's the biggest gift I've ever had.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah.
And what incredible timing. I mean,
I know. And they said that to me. They're like, you're the safest person in America. And I was like, I feel like it, and again, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. There was like a radio phone so that when the fires were happening, they could call me and say, you're safe. And, other folks like Henrietta Goodman has had to evacuate for fire when she was there. And that's happened to the residents before. I didn't. I just put up with a lot of smoke. But yeah, I'd go a couple weeks in there and I'd read books in my hammock and I'd write poems and I'd swim the river. And then I'd be like, well, I guess I should drive 2 hours to town and buy groceries and do a little laundry and call my mother. And then I'd be like, oh my God, I need my mask because we're like full on pandemic. And it was very strange. It was like a lot of brain switching to go from.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And because obviously we were going through a whole lot of brain switching and bizarreness out during that same time. So you kind of you missed out on at least a stretch of that, sort of. I mean, it was just a bizarre phenomenon all the way around, but a good time to do something like that too.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was perfect. It felt very much like kind of the universe aligning and just sort of saying you can't do anything else out there. If I'd stayed with my job in Yellowstone, that didn't happen. Most of those trips didn't happen. And I loved adjuncting. I adjuncted for, taught college writing for a decade, but I also didn't envy my colleagues who were having to teach freshman courses during the middle of the pandemic. That was terrible. God bless them. They did incredible work. All teachers just deserve raises and medals and all the things for their work during COVID.
Yeah,
I was glad not to doing it.
Teachers and healthcare workers.
Yeah.
An essential worker.
Frontline, but yeah.
My wife was checking groceries at the Good Food Store in Missoula, and
that's essential work too. Yeah.
You don't know what you're exposed to. You don't know what the upshot of anything is, and then of course in this bizarre reality that we're living in, you had a certain percentage of absolute, wackos that wanted to make everyone's life a living hell because obviously their own is a living hell. So they want to give the benefit of their existence.
I know. To emerge from that was such a culture shock. I mean, and I was in the woods still in November for the 2020 elections, and partners calling me on this terrible radio phone that's basically like a trucker CB where you're 10-4 good buddy, holding it down and then listening to them talk and holding it down. And so he's updating me on the elections while I'm in the wilderness, and part of me was I don't want to know, but then I was I kind of have to know. So it was a strange time.
Yeah, as it continues to be. So, anyway, read us another poem.
Okay.
So a lot of the books in the river where you forgot, what's the title again?
The River Where You Forgot My Name.
River Where You Forgot My Name. Yeah, a lot of those are historically sort of.
They are,
Yeah.
yes. The concept of the book is there's sort of braided narratives or braided voices. And one of the voices or threads is me, you know, in Montana, kind of processing my life and thinking about some of these themes around progress in the West and narratives and the collision of sort of man-made forces and destruction with the natural world. And then there's another thread that is a voice that I've imagined. So it's a persona voice based on the real life person, Julia Hancock Clark, who grew up in the same little town in Virginia that I did, and who, when she was 16, was married off to William Clark. So Clark met her, she was 13, on his way for the expedition. They survived, they came back. Clark kind of went home to Virginia, picked her up, married her, and moved her out to St. Louis. And she spent the rest of her very short life. She died of breast cancer when she was 29 in St. Louis, having babies for Clark. And so in my early days in Montana, as much as I am in love with and committed to the state and to being here now, I was very intimidated by it. You know, I had moved out there for a man's career and kind of following him, and didn't quite feel at home and felt like the landscape is harsh and indifferent, which it can be. It's part of what makes it so beautiful and special. But so I took sort of some comfort and solace in kind of thinking about that narrative and thinking about wilderness and thinking about progress in the West through this voice that I imagined for Julia. So a lot of these poems are kind of in her voice. They're thinking about Lewis and Clark. They're thinking about her day-to-day life. A few of them are set back in Virginia when she's still a little girl, in the same kind of landscape and area that I grew up. So I'll read this one, which is set in Virginia, so kind of pre-Clark, before she was married to William Clark. And I wrote this one too because I am just really kind of moved by and obsessed with the story of the American chestnut, which, you know, prior to the early 20th century was the most common tree on the eastern seaboard. I think they say like 1 in every 4 hardwood trees was an American chestnut, and then it was just completely wiped out by the blight, by a bug that came over probably from China in ornamental Chinese chestnuts. And so we pretty much lost that tree. It's still considered functionally extinct. There's some really interesting work going on with genetics and crossbreeding to try to kind of bring it back and make a blight resistant version of this tree. But it was just a part of the ecosystem, and animals depended on it, and human economies and communities, especially rural ones, depended on it. And whenever I go home and like visit my family, my dad and I often like go up on the Blue Ridge Parkway in Virginia and like look for, you know, some like lost, forgotten chestnut. And you can find their you find stumps, and sometimes the suckers and the roots stay alive, so the blight doesn't attack the roots. So they'll put up little shoots and suckers, and then they'll die back. And so you can kind of find those out there. But I was thinking about, well, for Julia, who was alive in the, you know, late 18th, early 19th century, they just would have been everywhere. They would have been the tree that she walked under in the forests. And so kind of thinking about time that way, because this book is also very obsessed with time. So this is from Julia's perspective. It's called Chestnut Sabbath, Fincastle, Virginia, 1804. What clamored squall in startling a tom turkey back to Chestnut's shelter from his worm shucking in the dawn-wet fields? Ritual of snaring and snipping from their lives, the little soil eaters pulled up like thread from the earth's stormy needlepoint canvas to keep from drowning. He squabbles in shade now, hunts leaf litter, and de-armors the chestnuts beneath their mother trees, watchkeepers, aged and aging in their uninterrupted dominion. Time is its own form of idle malady, which stirs, brews, fruits, or readies its black powder beyond our knowing. All things abide here between summon and pluck.
Yeah.
So, for me, that, you know, is really just kind of a poem about how time makes things possible that seem inconceivable. When whether that's, sort of a ravaging or a growth or what, but
Right.
yeah, we're all at once.
We're all along for the ride. One of the things I noticed that in some of the handful of poems that I read on, well, I just, that whole page of poems, and obviously I did not keep track of things like I should have, to ask you, oh, read this one. But one of the things that you do so well is the detail of description, which they're like mini videos. They're like super nicely done, many little, you can really, feel your way into this situation. It's like, they're like little movies. And I mean, I thought I was thinking, wow, she's really, really good at that. And because I mean, that's the kind of detail that I don't see as often in poetry as I do like in fiction, probably. But but it's woven in there, and the music is all there, and you do a really good job of that. And I wish I could point to something, but you probably know one off of your page that deals with that kind of, like, whether it's a deer or whether it's whatever.
Oh, let me read. Okay, I have a good one to kind of read in response to that, which you probably read, the 3 Bobcat Day poem.
Poem, yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
I'll read this one. I love this one. And it's a really just kind of simple poem. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's called 3 Bobcat Day, and it's from my friend Megan Blankenship. One bobcat in the tea dregs light of dawn outside Mountain Home, Arkansas. And then, absurd, impossible, tucking its stub-tail bottom to scoot under bush, another. God, you said then, show me a third. Show me one more, and I'll believe. Here in the spring Siskiyous, 4 does do step the meadow each morning, timid yet timely, present through the bloom and dissolution of cherry trees flowering, through the heart's slow settling of sediment, as the river prepares a bed for the steelhead's return and a beacon for the strange brain that sings to them of home when they reach it. Is noticing coincidence a form of divinity or worship? If not, a comforting mistake. Oh yes, I reply, when you write, healed grows up around and inside you, unruly as blackberry bramble, coming back, thorned as ever. Oh yes, though still, one dawn, all the regular chorus and clatter, but only 3 deer in their split black ballet shoes, and the mind, limber with lions, licks a moony claw, bounds back along the ever so delicately darkened tracks through dew.
Yeah, wonderful detail, of in the animal world in particular, of course.
Yeah.
Maybe those of us that spend or have had the opportunity to spend more time outside in the animal world, maybe we dig that more, or because it's like everything that you experience. The beauty of poem is that it becomes my poem as soon as I read it.
The whole point. Yeah, once it's out there, it's
mine. I remember this, and it's all the little ballet slippers. Yes, all that kind of detail you've never seen somewhere. Nicely done. How well? Anything else? Anything that you want to talk about in particular, or lead us toward with a poem that you wanted to sort of maybe offer up today, or?
Yes, all the things.
Well, good.
Why don't we do 52 Hertz? So this is, I sometimes joke that this is like, you have to have your greatest hits, right? Like your track of like, I think this one is a greatest hits for me, and also kind of in keeping, I think, with this idea of animals and attention. And I'll preface this by just explaining that 52 Hertz is the name that NOAA, the National Organization for, I always forget what the actual acronym is. Look it up real quick. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So NOAA and some other kind of monitoring stations on the West Coast named this whale because they've been picking up on its call for years, like since the 90s. And it doesn't like match any known whale frequencies. It's actually like higher than most whales can hear. And so there's been a lot of debate about like, well, what is this and why is this whale alone? And is it Hertz? Is it a hybrid? Is it a mutant of some kind? But it's like made this journey up and down the West Coast for years and years, and it's just singing the whole time. And it's, you know, whales are very social animals. They usually travel in pods. And so what's this guy doing and what's his story and why is he all alone out there and still singing about it? So this is 52 Hertz, and I sort of wrote it kind of as a epistolary poem and like a back and forth with a pen pal of mine. So 52 Hertz, a letter to Shay in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. No rebellions from the sea of late, you write. You must be pleased to see it calm, the gray Atlantic, which yearly moves the slender strip of your island a little east, a little west. Across the continent, the whale, known as the loneliest leviathan on earth, roams northward to Kodiak and the Aleutians, singing as much to the silver-furred grizzly kings and to the blue spruce as to its own kind. I can hardly stand to think of it, that solitary keen in the ocean's dusk, too high for anyone to hear but a headphone-clad oceanographer in NOAA's quiet coastal observatory. That is, you must know, my favorite of all acronyms. There are those who suggest the 52 Hertz whale is deaf. Mostly deaf people have suggested this. Dear cetologists, have you considered the possibility the whale is singing into silence, into a trembling in his own bones? Your letter describes a little paper bag full of last year's white poplar leaves, like plaster chiselings, pelicans ruling thrones of old pilings, a sable horse by the frosted pond, your cats inspecting the valleys between one another's claws. I'd gather them, if I could, sing in their language. I'll pen this letter on a single olive leaf. I'll tell you what I saw today. Flecked sparrows in the winter brush, cobble-eyed, close enough to touch. And I think people just always like, it isn't even about the poem. Like when I read that poem, like people will come up to me afterwards and just be like, the whale. I'm like, I know, the whale. Like, like we're all 52 Hertz. Like we're all just like out there alone singing about it.
Yeah, but it's also just wonderfully full of such rich detail as it, you know, sort of does its description or thinking about, and you know, and as in the process of listening to that and those images coming back to me, I was reminded of another one in which I don't know what poem that was that I read, the blind deer. The one where the deer touches the fence with his nose to see how high it is before he jumps over the fence.
I don't know if that's me, Mark.
Okay, who else am I reading? Did I stick somebody else?
That sounds great. You should send that to me.
It's great. And then yeah, who the hell wrote that?
It sounds like a Corrie poem.
They come out and spook the deer. It jumps over the fence because it knew that the height of the fence where it was at. But then as in its panic, as it's running away, it's bumping into trees.
Oh my gosh.
It's just a wonderfully detailed description of it. That wasn't your poem?
That's not mine, but that's funny. I mean, like my partner will send me articles sometimes or little snippets and he'll be like, this sounds like a Corrie poem. And like, that sounds like a Corrie poem. So I'd love to read it when you figure out who it is, but it's not me. I mean,
all right. That's why I thought it was you. But if I find out, I'll email you who it was.
Okay, please do. No, it sounds,
maybe if they see this, they'll say that was my poem.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe it's somebody who else you've interviewed. Yeah.
That's half the fun of doing these, is that they will hopefully be available in for all of that kind of work that we do with other people, teachers and the like, to be able to then have access to these kinds of things, to the poems and to the poets. I think this is a good aspect of the whole trip too, is to just have a little account of who this person is.
Mhm.
The formal sort of things. This tries to be informal anyway.
No, I love it. It's just been really great and easy and fun. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we still have time. I don't, let me check and see what I have here. I do this all the time. And there are no edits in this stupid thing.
Oh my gosh.
If they don't like it, tough, move on.
Raw cut. Yeah.
Maybe we have time for at least one or two more. I don't remember how much time we spent yada yadaing before we pushed the button, but
I don't either.
let's think about a couple you can wrap up with here for us.
Okay. Let's do, I feel like I have not read much from this one, but that's okay. I want to read newer stuff, I think. Let's just read another wilderness poem. So when I was at the Rogue, I was living on this basically old, like former homestead. So it had been homesteaded by a German immigrant in probably the late 19th century, who planted this incredible apple orchard there. So it had these like 100-year-old apple trees and black or English walnuts. I forget if they're English or black walnuts, but so in the fall, and it was an incredible apple year, like perfect spring, tons of flowers, bees everywhere, like just this bumper crop for apples. And so in the fall, I just, I could have filled a dump truck with apples a couple times over, and it was just me and the black bears. And so like I'd come out of my little deck in the evening and the bears would be just like making their rounds through the trees and run into these like huge piles of bear shit everywhere. But I wanted some apples too, and I really like making apple butter. And so I just cooked them down in my little propane stove that I had in there, because I didn't have electricity, it was off the grid. But I really like to like make apple butter where you would use an immersion blender to blend it. So I used a diesel generator to run my immersion blender to make apple butter from my apples in the wilderness. And this poem is about that and other things, but it's called "Using a Generator Indoors Can Kill You in Minutes." Using a generator indoors can kill you in minutes, I read on the big red and black Honda before firing it up inside, right next to the propane stove, because it is fall and the birds know it and wing away, just as the lizards in the woodpile know and slow their scuttling, while the walnut knows, and in the strange way of the world, seals off its own leaves to die by draining from them the blood of the sun. And the apple trees know and unburden themselves. And I am turning their year's work into butter, because little in the world strikes me as holy wealth so much as food, jarred in clean glass, which I am lucky to find in a year where the whole unlucky nation has turned to canning like the metaphor it is. A year I spent mostly watching the wind, which churns now in the forest, calving limbs from trees to lay across the road, which will necessitate the use of another tool that could at any moment lead me to dusty death, that old unreliable chainsaw, toothy as a bear trap, with its orange warning sticker of an arm shorn of its hand. Though wouldn't it be handy if the world itself came with a warning telling us what is safe, what dangerous, crisp clear as one sweet apple and one tart, which is how you make the butter best worth saving, sealed tight with a bright pating that means tomorrow and perhaps tomorrow.
Nice. Yeah.
I guess also a very COVID poem too, just, because everybody.
Did you
mason jars.
did your family you do a lot of canning growing up? Was your parents, your mom or your dad, or?
Yes, some. My dad's family, who grew up like very, very rural, sort of, down to the dirt folks in Bedford County, Virginia. His mom, I think, did a lot. And then we did some. We mostly did like pickles and jams when I was a kid. And then I've since just gotten really into it. Like I always want to make like spicy pickles. And apple butter is just so easy. Like wherever you live, especially in Montana, like walk down a street and somebody's apples are just like laying on the sidewalk going to waste. And like there's just nothing better than like really awesome, simple cooked down apples with cinnamon. So
Butter, applesauce, apple pie. Yeah.
so
Cinnamon, little
just a free gift, you know, like
we had I think I read in one of the poems I read earlier, there was reference to a root cellar in it.
Yes.
Yeah, we definitely had root cellars and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just that I always feel very rich after I can, you know, like I love sort of in September, like looking up at my shelves and they're like covered in pickle jars and sometimes salsa or tomatillo, you know, mixtures and apple butters and things. And I'm just like, I'm wealthy, you know, like
well, yeah, and you've done a little bit of that work so it's there. So now you can be lazy and
right, I know. And you've like saved something that like just came out of the ground for you. And yeah, no, it's a nice feeling. It's a good feeling.
well, this has been a pleasure, Corrie. It's nice to meet you. And I look forward to you're going to send me something, right?
I will. I'm going to send you copies of both books in the mail. Yep.
And let me know what I can send you back. I guess why don't we do one more for the road before we're out of here?
What should we read? Let me think. Oh, all right. We'll do actually. Okay, I've got another one that also feels good for the moment, and it's just a little shorty. This is called Mantis, and this is, you know, for all my ladies out there. I think everybody knows that the female mantis eats the male mantis after copulation. It's a little poem about that.
Dessert.
Dessert. Exactly. Mantis. A mantis is cleaning the green diamond of her face in the cool air outside my kitchen window. What pious ignorance in her given name. Don't you see she is at work, not prayer? Her arms are crosscut saws she prepares for hewing, cutters and rakers to drag through a core. She is tooth, gullet, and tender blade, though yes, looking for her lord.
Nice. Yeah. Well, this has been a delight. You do wonderful work with words on the page. Continue. What's the title of the new manuscript?
It's called Your Mother's Bear Gun.
Your Mother's Spare Gun?
Bear gun, like a gun for bears. So this comes from another sort of person. Several years ago, I was home visiting my parents, and like we got in the truck to go for a hike, and my sister was like, Dad, like, are all the guns out of the car? You know, like, do we need to like check for this? And open the console, and there's a pistol. And he was like, oh no, it's fine. It's just your mother's bear gun. My mother has never fired a gun in her life, but she's very afraid of bears. There's tons of bears in this manuscript. My father owns a lot of guns and thinks that he is making my mother feel empowered to go on a hike if he can bring a pistol, which I hope he would never shoot a bear with. But like, it's so your mother's, and at the time, in that very moment, I was like, Dad, like that, I'm gonna call a poetry book that, like that, I'm putting that in my pocket. And I did, and just how it worked is that this manuscript is it is just a lot about danger and harm and interactions and bears and the wilderness, and guns and ways that we
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep you posted when it comes into the world, hopefully in the next couple of years. But yeah, and I will send you books, and thank you. This was such a pleasure, Mark. It's really fun to meet you and get to read poems and talk a bit. So.
Yeah, we don't get to talk about poetry every day, so we take advantage of it.
It is always a treat. Yeah, always something I want to not take for granted.
I look forward to meeting you in person one of these days.
Yes, I'll let you know one time when I'm headed through Missoula. Definitely head that way a couple times a year. So.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
lifetime filled